Hello and welcome to our Sustainability Dialogues at our HCLTech Pavilion here at Davos. We're coming to you from the 53rd annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. Over the course of the next few days, we'll be talking about some of the most challenging issues facing sustainability and decisions around it. My name is Aoife Walsh and I'm the Head of Marketing for Sustainability at HCLTech. I'm joined by three experts, and today we're going to be discussing how sustainability is increasingly a major imperative in shaping brand perception and equity across stakeholders. I'm joined today by Robert Haig, Strategy and Sustainability Director for Brand Research and Valuation Consultancy Brand Finance, Mazrame Mome, Director of Group Marketing and Corporate Affairs at Old Mutual, a Pan-African investment, savings, insurance and banking group, and Santosh Jairam, Global Head of Sustainability for HCLTech. So, Robert, coming to you first. Thank you for joining us today. Brand perception has always been fundamental to the equity and value in a company, but with the increasing focus on sustainability, how do brands tread that fine line between communicating their sustainability achievements and their goals and avoiding greenwashing at the same time?
Well, you're exactly right to say that it's a fine line, and I think really there's no sort of easy answer or there's no right answer. I think it's incredibly important to avoid greenwashing in general because it's corrosive to trust both for the brand and for sustainability claims. But the answer to that is not to just cease all communication around sustainability, both because that leaves value on the table for that brand, but also because we want to create a sort of peer pressure environment where brands are sort of encouraging each other to do more by communicating. I think the answer really is to just be as holistic as possible with your communication. So you don't, for example, want to just selectively communicate about one good thing that you're doing, because that leaves you open to accusations maybe of deflection, which has been sort of levelled at oil and gas companies. What you really want to be doing is sort of saying, okay, here's what we've achieved, here's what we plan to achieve, and here's what we haven't quite achieved yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Mazrame, your opinion on this one?
I agree with you. Today, there's information flow across the world. Previously, you could focus on your marketing, hoping that you will be speaking to a specific segment of the market, but now everybody gets the same information. So there's information democracy. And because of that, I think companies need to be responsible about what they say, what they market, and how they say it. And you're right that it could easily be perceived as greenwashing or even deflecting if you do not put the truth on the table. And by the truth, I mean what goes into publicly available reports, like annual reports. What you measure internally also has to talk to what is out there in the market. So it is important that the responsibility in communication is taken quite seriously, not only by the marketers, but everybody that deals with sustainability, considering that sustainability has become everybody's business across the whole value chain in most companies.
So absolutely. So in the age of information democracy, you said truth really matters. Santosh, your view on this one?
For me, brand is a perceived relationship between a stakeholder and the organization, whichever it is. So with that, communication is the key. But what goes wrong when we move into that greenwashing area? What typically goes wrong? There are three things I would like to point out. One is when you try to reposition something you are already doing as a sustainability effort. That's the first thing which goes wrong, because there is no additionality. Okay, so and that's where many companies make that mistake. The second one, which I would say, is transparency. And I would give you an example. When one of my flights, I had the board member of that company sitting next to me. And the moment he knew that I'm a sustainability professional, he asked me, have you offset your emissions of this flight? So I countered him asking that, but you are not transparent as to where you are offsetting. So the problem is, as a stakeholder, offsetting is good, I know that, but until unless I have the clear information, I wouldn't buy into it. So transparency is the key. Just by saying it is not enough. Okay. The last one is also, thinking that sustainability communication is one time. And this is again a mistake which many company does. Once you publish a report, you expect everybody to read it. And not many people read it. And also the fact that it is not static. You need to show the continual improvement. If you are not showing the continual improvement, people know that it was created for once and there is no movement with that. So I think basically these would be the three dimensions. If organizations get it right, they can avoid greenwashing.
So there's a real fine line and a real balancing act. I wanted to talk next about some of the long-term decisions, the long-term, more sustainable decisions that brands need to make, as opposed to those short-term focused on maybe quarterly results, etc. And the impact that that's having on value for organizations. Mazrami, if we can come to you first on that, the sorts of decisions and the sorts of things that are happening within your organization.
Well, for Old Mutual, we've been very clear about where we can have the most impact. Since we have an investment business within our group, we make sure that we influence our investors to start thinking about green bonds and also reduce their involvement in coal. And this is Africa, where coal mining is still a driver of employment, and communities do get involved. So when we talk about what companies are doing and how accountable we should be, it's about also saying, as we encourage our investors to reduce thermal coal in their portfolios, let's also think about communities. So that's a very important part of what we do at Old Mutual. We try to balance what we do. But that said, we've also signed up with the global movements, and it was a public declaration that we want to be transparent, and we are set on a long-term goal and a commitment to be quite responsible in our own emissions operationally, but also from influencing what our investors do. It's not easy, but going out publicly and talking about it actually says you are committed for the long term. The other important thing that we've done was to issue our first climate report for 2021. And in that report, it highlights all the elements of ESG that we are pushing. And to your point, it is important to see these reports as building on the work that we action every year. So our 2022 report, which will be published this year, will be a build-up from where we started. And in that report, we've also shown commitment to the net zero alliances, both as an asset owner and an asset manager. So those are big commitments. Yes. And we're holding ourselves accountable to executing what will be in these reports for the long term.
Those are some really remarkable commitments. Thank you for sharing those. Santosh?
See, in terms of the commitment, I would say, again, going back to the top topic in the sustainability field, climate change, we have declared that we will be going net zero by 2040. And we also stated that by 2030, we will reduce our absolute emissions by 50%. And when I say absolute, I mean that we are decoupling our emissions with our growth. So even if we grow 10 times, our emissions would be cut by 50% compared to our 2020 benchmark. And so that's very important. Of course, we have our targets which are stated in our sustainability report in terms of the social parameters, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And well, there are two things which I wanted to tell you in terms of the things which we are kind of doing. One is, in terms of the investments which we are making in creating sustainable solutions. When I say solutions, we at HCLTech believe that the convergence of digital tech and sustainability is going to be the biggest driver going forward. And so we are looking at how we can bring that value to the clients, and hence we are investing into that convergence of the tech solutions and to provide those solutions to our clients. So that's one. The second one is also as to how do we make, we are at 220,000 plus employees, how do we make each one of our employee a change agent? So we have come out with a sustainability school, which is open for all the 220,000 employees. We have been running some very good courses. When I say very good, it is based on the feedback I receive from the employees. And we are getting some very good feedbacks. We are even getting feedbacks where the employees are saying is that these courses, I'm even showing it to my children. So I think it's very important to kind of create that ecosystem, because when you make them as the change agent, it is not just them, it is their community and maybe even the clients whom they interact with. So I think that's something which we are doing a little differently, I think.
Yeah. Those are some great examples of those long-term decisions that are different from just that short-term view. And we'll come back and talk some more about investors and the perception that's coming from that. Robert, anything that you are seeing from the work, the research that you do?
Well, I think I'd sort of build on what Santosh was saying there. So what we have seen, which is really encouraging, is that sustainability's gone from being a slightly sort of fringe concern that has been there for really quite a long time to, in the last few years, becoming a kind of central part of C-suite discussions. And the fact that at HCLTech it's now becoming sort of embedded across the organisation is a really encouraging thing, and that's the kind of thing that we've been seeing in lots of the clients that we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. And Santosh, if we can begin to think about some of the outcomes, some of the results that have happened, and some of the, the perceptions that how investors, for example, have reacted to those sorts of decisions. Any feedback that you give us on that at this stage?
See, from an HCL perspective, the way we take many of these ratings in terms of a validation as to how the investors or the analyst community perceive us. So it's a measure of that. We can do whatever we want, but how they perceive us is important. So some of these ESG ratings are very important. We have whatever initiative which you have taken, I think it has resulted into a good improvements in terms of many of those ratings. We are on the top quartile of most of them. But there was one particular study which caught my attention, which was the recent PwC survey, which it's a global investor survey which they did. And they asked a question to the investors as to, do the investors think that there is some greenwashing in terms of corporate reporting? That was the question. And only 2% of them said, not at all. That's kind of a difficult thing to digest. As one of my friends said that, there is more percentage of people who still believe the earth is flat.
Perception matters.
Exactly. So while I from an HCL perspective, what we are doing, it is reflecting into many of these rating agencies. But from an investor's outlook perspective, I still feel that number has to change.
Absolutely. Masuma, anything that you're seeing with your investor community in particular?
Yeah, in the last 2 years during our AGMs, the questions that are coming from shareholders and, the activists show that this has been taken quite seriously. And on our side as All Mutual, we put so much integrity into the reporting process to make sure that whatever is in there is what we do in business. So, for example, in Africa and South Africa in particularly, where we have massive disparities between the rich and the poor, one of the things that investors look for in their remuneration report is the gap between the most highly paid executives and the lowest paid employees. What it has done for us is to make us quite conscious about, not necessarily thinking that we can completely close the gap, but doing the right thing for the employees at the bottom of the pyramid. It is a very important thing for Africa, but for South Africa, where a lot of people had been kept outside of the economy. So that's one example. But the other examples have to do with looking at the detail in the reports, and coming up and saying, so this is what you said the previous year. Why is it looking a little bit different?
Yes,
because
absolutely.
of that, we have a group of people whose purpose is to look into whether what we do internally on a day-to-day basis builds up to what goes out to the public. So it's an important thing, and it's still low. It has low visibility, but I can see investors and shareholders continuing to ask very difficult questions and demanding more from companies, demanding more than what they've always focused on, which is financial results and financial growth.
So a real increase in scrutiny from investors. Robert, how about you? What are you seeing through your research?
Yeah, we do a lot of research with investors and analysts, and it's a really mixed bag, to be honest. I mean, on the one hand, there are those who have a very high level of understanding, and maybe they even have a sort of dark green mandate where they're specifically tasked with seeking out companies and investments that actively do good. There's a kind of large section in the middle who are broadly positive about ESG, but when you kind of dig a bit deeper, they sort of treat it more like a tick box exercise, or they're not exactly sure how to interrogate information very well. And then at the far end, you have those who are sort of laggards, I guess you could say. And even in the US, there's been a bit of a backlash against ESG-related investing. So you could argue that ESG and sustainability itself has a branding issue in certain locations. So.
Very interesting. And this last question in the time we have for you, Robert, around redefining how we quantify brand equity. Well, first, do you agree? And then how could we do that? How could we go about doing that?
Well, I think Brand Finance has been evaluating brands for over 25 years and placing values on them. So I think from our point of view, it would be a case of evolution rather than revolution. So I think the process is okay, but what we need to be doing is constantly looking at the factors that really shape perceptions and shape brand image. And in the context of this discussion, it's very important to realise that sustainability is coming up the agenda and has been for a while. And that's why today we launched our Sustainability Perceptions Index to really highlight the value that is tied up in sustainability perceptions. And in HCL's case, that's over $500 million worth of value.
Value, absolutely. Santosh, your view on this point?
See, for me, it's not just the products and services, It's as a company where you stand on some of the critical issues. That's your brand equity. And it's very important because that's where you differentiate yourself. And if you really look at some of the positions which many of the companies have taken on some of this, you can clearly differentiate them from their peers. And for me, that's going to be the critical part, where you stand on critical issues and what are you doing about it.
Mazime, your reflections on this one?
Yeah, for me, brand equity is not going to be measured like we used to before. I think sustainability is becoming an important part of the mix. So any company that sees itself growing in the future and bringing in their customers, their employees and other stakeholders along with them needs to understand that growth goes beyond just products and services, like you were saying, Santos, but reputation becomes important too. So the way we practically do it with my team is that we have a combined team of marketers and a team that works on sustainability and public affairs. And how we measure our performance is around how we're building reputation and how we're building brand equity. And I think the two, over time, will come naturally together. For people that are exclusively looking at sustainability on its own and measuring reputation on its own, and those that are looking at brand equity on their own, are starting to kind of figure out how to bring that together. I'm happy that we are pioneering that at Old Mutual, and it's not been easy to bring different teams that think they have different purposes to see that the future will be different. And that, for me, is about trust. If you have two working together, you build trust, and your business will be differentiated, in future. It's a slow slog, but I think what's happening in the world is quite exciting, and those that are prepared to take a big investment and put it behind building sustainability in their companies are the ones that are going to win. And I'd like to hear more about how many employees did you say you have that are getting training on sustainability?
So we have a 220,000 and it's growing every day. So we say 220,000 plus employees.
My goodness, I'd love to see our company learning from you, because that's awesome to get everybody buying into it and becoming a way of doing business.
Masuma, you've given us an idea for the next topic, but we've run out of time. So thank you for your insights, Robert, Musume and Santosh. Perception really does matter. Thank you and goodbye from Davos for now.